We have Sherry Clemens, and then in the District 5, we had last minute cancellation, unfortunately, but we have Jan Stell joining us, who is running for the District 5 election as well. So welcome, ladies. Pleasure to see you. Thank you for joining us this morning. If I'd like to give you perhaps a 10, 15-second intro to yourself, and then we'll get started with our conversation this morning. Let's start with Jan.
Hi, I'm Jan Stell. I've lived in RISD and been a taxpayer for almost 40 years. I've also been a realtor and a mom. My child went from K through 12 in RISD. Even when his elementary school was a Title IV school. We felt very blessed to be in a diverse neighborhood where there were lots of different folks that we could enjoy, get to meet, be of help and service and so forth. I have a master's in education. Before I was married and had a child, I actually taught in RISD, which is kind of unique. I taught at Skyview Elementary, 4th grade, and I taught Brentfield, 2nd grade. And I also taught in Spring and Plano ISD. Those were the days before caps on the number of students in a classroom. I can remember when my 35th, 36th second grader was introduced to my class, I said to the office as they brought them, please bring a desk and please bring a set of books. I'm not able to find any in the building. So it just shows you how things have changed. We wouldn't do that anymore. And you know, I tease people. I started in August, and by Christmas with the 36 and 7 students, I had lost 30 pounds. So they get tickled at that. My mother, of course, had sewn my clothes. Y'all remember those days. Sure. And my clothes were literally falling off of me. So I can look back and smile at that. Now we would not smile, we would growl. And I even said to my principal, I think she was, I can't remember, 31 at the time. I said, can I have a duty-free lunch so I can eat and go to the restroom? She said, oh, we'll work on that for next year. And I was like, I won't be here next year. And I wasn't. I mean, it was exhausting. So I can imagine. Things have changed. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. And Vanessa, yourself as way of introduction.
Sure. I'm Vanessa Pacheco, and I'm running for District 2, Richardson ISD Board of Trustees. I am a parent of Richardson students. I have one graduated from Berkner, and the other one's a junior right now. They've been there in Richardson since elementary school. I love our schools. I love our community. I, too, am a product of public school system. I have an MBA from UT Dallas in global leadership. I'm bilingual. Actually trilingual, but I don't use my French very much. And I know programming languages, so I'm plurilinguistic. Okay. And, I'm here to support educational programs. My business acumen is in the finance, acquisitions, divestitures, big budgets. So I know how to look at that. I want to make sure we support our teachers and our students. I want to provide the right products. I want to improve Richardson ISD and give them the best opportunities, the right resources for what we need. And I want to make it competitive. I want to make sure we have equity in education. Mm-hmm. I want to make sure all our students have what they need and thrive and be enriched and ready to be, go to the workforce, go to college, go to the military, but not just attend. I want them to be amazing at whatever field they choose to be. And of course, I want them to be critical thinkers and strong contributors to our world economy.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. That's some great goals. I like those. And then share a lot of those for sure. And then Sherry Clemens.
Hi guys, Sherry Clemens here. I've got 4 kids in the district. We've lived in Richardson since 2010 is when we moved here, right when I was about to have my second child. And 2 kids later, here we are with 4 in the district, 3 are in elementary school and 1 in junior high. So next year I'll have 1 in high school, 1 in junior high, and 2 in elementary. One of my daughters has special needs. 2 of my kids are GT learners. So I have a lot of knowledge from the parent side. And then I was a teacher. So I taught 1st grade and 3rd grade in Forney ISD. And before that, I worked as a Head Start specialist for Region 10. And I got my master's in education when I was teaching in Forney. And I loved the opportunity they gave me. They actually paid for my master's, which was exceptional. I mean, we had to pay for some of it and supplement it, but they definitely helped that. And that was a really great motivator for me as a teacher. And just thinking through what Vanessa said about wanting to support our teachers, that's definitely a goal of mine, as well as really getting our focus back to education. I feel like, I know since 2010, the numbers have really dropped in Richardson ISD. Our scores, our achievement isn't where we want it to be. And we're paying really good taxes for a really good school district and wanting to make sure we educate all 100% of our students to the best of their ability. Yeah. So
I love that. Thank you. So I think it's safe to say that all you folks are 100% behind making our district better and academically improved upon where it is. I think that'd be a safe encapsulation of your opening introductions there. Thank you so much. So without further ado, let's just jump into some of the stuff that's contemporary to what's happening in education today, to look at some of the problems we're facing. And in this regard, superintendents, I think we'll start at the top. Why are they leaving? I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the Texas Tribune, where they had the 3 superintendents in the Dallas area that were willing to be on. And that was Dr. Scribner out of Fort Worth, Dr. Hinojosa here in Dallas ISD, and of course, our own departed superintendent, Dr. Jeannie Stone. And the discussion turned to why these folks were leaving, what was happening. And I think there's perhaps a slight bend on the idea that these superintendents are leaving en masse because they're dissatisfied with what's happening. There is a amount of dissatisfaction, no doubt. I think Dr. Stone mentioned the reason why she said she had left was because it got, I don't want to misquote her, but she said it got very political and that she wasn't a political person. So I'd like to open up that idea with superintendents leaving. What do you think's creating some of that? And who'd like to start that off? We'll have an open forum for this.
I don't mind starting. I mean, I think to me, it seems like a lot of things, right? We know that there's not just one reason why all the superintendents are leaving. I do think that COVID played a huge role in taking a toll on their personal life and just their daily. I mean, they were making these decisions that weren't the normal decisions that the school district was making. And I think that caused a lot of stress. And I think that combined with the decline in academics, especially in Richardson ISD, to me, there was no way Dr. Stone could recover our school district herself, like being the lead. It seemed because of COVID and then this academic slide, there, how superintendents don't stay that long anyway. They stay I think the average is 6 years or something, maybe even less. And so she was kind of hitting that anyway. And I think that it naturally, to me, seemed the logical thing for her and a lot of these superintendents to say, I am not going to fix this district in a short amount of time that they're going to give me before they look at the numbers and see that it's declining. And so I'm going to move on and do something different. So I think that's one of the many reasons, why we're seeing this number be so big. I think it's 11 in our DFW area alone. And I think I can't remember. Do y'all know the number about how many across Texas? But it's a lot.
Yeah, I know North Texas had 11. But,
yeah, okay.
But I believe four of those were retirements. Just to go back to the 3 I mentioned Dr. Stone and her reason for departing. Dr. Hinojosa is retiring, but he's been twice at the ISD. He's been in the long haul, and he's probably going to run for mayor. He's doing a lot of background searching on that right now. That was kind of an interesting joke at the meeting, was to try and get him to commit to say, I'm running or not running, as the case may be. And then, of course, Dr. Scribner was going to go 2 more years, but he just announced he's leaving this August. So he had announced he was going to be there for 2 years, helping them transition, and he announced his leaving as well. Anyone else, Vanessa, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
Yes, I do, actually. I think numbers were going down, and all superintendents in all of Texas were working towards improving outcomes for students prior to COVID. I will say that the ultimate show of disrespect to our educators and our superintendents and the decisions that they were making does drive a lot of that, a lot of those decisions. They are professionals, and they were not treated as professionals during that time. I will also say that not just Richardson is the only district that suffered, downgrades, I guess, if we want to see that in outcomes or testing. We actually didn't test. Our last test results were 2019 in the entire nation. this, suffered. It wasn't just Richardson, it wasn't just Texas, it was every student across the country. So we cannot just blame one superintendent or our North Texas superintendents. It was a national setback. And it was a complete show of disrespect in so many ways throughout the country. And our teachers are stressed. Nobody was planning for this. We weren't ready for this. A lot of the issues and situations that we see made sure we saw the real inequities in our students, such as internet access, such as computer access. And we know that these things existed prior to COVID. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Okay, so it was at the forefront. It was something we had to deal with right away. And finally, Richardson ISD actually did improve on some of their testing scores throughout the pandemic. And if we look at the most recent data, a lot of our students who received additional support and enrichment programs did improve on their test scores. Maybe it's not 50, 20 points or 30 points, and they're not at the same level as students who are economically advantaged or have parents who have resources to take them to special places or have tutors, but they have improved. They're not improving as fast as I'd like them to improve, but they did improve some. Thank you.
Into perspective, I'm just going to jump on the idea of the disrespect a little bit, because I think that we would agree that it was a two-way street. I think when a superintendent is navigating the tumultuous field of education, and of late, especially during COVID, it was rather tumultuous. And I think that what happened a lot of the time was people didn't feel like they were being heard. I think that goes from the leadership top down. And I think that for me, and I was a vocal opponent of what Dr. Stone in our district was doing. I don't hold any bones about that. I think there were a number of areas in which we had slid. And yes, there were some areas we had improved it. There's no doubt about that. But I think for me as an educator, for me as a taxpaying resident of the district, I looked across this field and thought, wow. I mean, I went to every single school board meeting from 2016 to 2019 when my house got hit by that tornado in October 2019. And when I came back from the farming side, and we got hit by natural disaster down there with the freeze, so somehow God has chased me all over the place with the fury of nature. I came back to a school board meeting in June, July of last year, and it was just chaos. And unfortunately, right or wrong, the leader takes responsibility for that chaos. The buck has to stop somewhere. Would you agree, Vanessa?
I do agree. I also agree, or I would say that there is chaos, there was chaos, and leadership does need to lead. But we also, instead of just going in and complaining and creating more chaos, maybe as constituents, we can go in and provide solutions.
Absolutely. And that's, yeah, and I'm not a guy to just complain for the sake of complaining. I mean, you guys know me. I had solutions, but you have to have somebody to actually be willing to listen to some of those. And again, I joke in all jest, a lot of my ideas and solutions are not going to work because I don't think any one person is genius enough to come up with all the answers. So listen to me say, hey, Euan, that's a great one. That's not a great one. And that's where we are in leadership today in education is how do we listen to what people are saying and then tell them, I appreciate that, but I disagree. And then we can still be friends. We can still move on. So, thanks. Yeah, those are good points, Vanessa. And thank you for that insight for sure. Jan, do you have anything you want to add?
Well, just like other industries, I think we're hearing about this. Our unemployment is down by, like 50 from 52 years ago. So I think every industry is finding the baby boomers have boomed through. They're wanting to make a lifestyle change, whether they get rid of the big CEO or the CFO job and move to either to something more interesting, less stressful. So I think, I'm hearing from people that have large corporations that they're going to lose, their top people. So I think that part of it's just indicative of the nature of the age of the people. But I do think COVID, I think a school district is a huge undertaking. Of course, obviously Fort Worth, it has 150,000 students. We don't have that. We're under 40,000, but it's still, a large in terms of keeping the food service going and the buses, the transportation. It's it's a city in itself. So then when you throw in COVID, literally with, I mean, it's a disaster that no one has ever faced. And all of a sudden the protocol, and I think they even said some of the protocol would come out in the morning at something, and by afternoon it would be different. And of course, there was so much information coming. I mean, didn't y'all sit home for a month? We did. We weren't sure what was going on. And then we all decided that we still had to live. Well, here you're doing it for 39,000 children, which then impacts possibly not quite 39,000 families because they've got multiple children, but you can't, anyway, I think there was aging out. I think there was huge fatigue, huge stress, and lots of screaming. And I am so disappointed at our lack of professionalism, which I think has trickled down. And I'm deeply concerned for our school districts with that and our country.
And yeah, I think I'm looking at the chat session here, and Lynn Davenport has jumped in with a question on Stone ignoring the science and shutting off any discourse. Talk about Clay Jenkins controlled her decisions. And I think if we can segue that into perhaps the lawsuits that came from the governor, sued several school districts at the Texas Tribune meeting with the three superintendents. I think that Dr. Hinojosa joked that the governor didn't come after him because he was too big and they would have fought back. Perhaps there's some truth that you pick the fights you think you can win. And it just cost some districts a fair amount of money, although we do have the attorneys on staff to handle some of that. What is your take, folks, if I can throw this out there to you, on our lawsuit against the governor, the pushback we did? We joined La Jolla Independent School District in saying that the governor's orders were unconstitutional in the Texas Constitution.
Well, and again, we were in unprecedented time. Do you listen to the president? Do you listen to the governor? Do you listen to the quote unquote COVID experts? I mean, I don't think we had ever had, I mean, we weren't at war, but it became a COVID war, and I don't think there were clear lines as to who the general was and who the lieutenants were or whatever. And a lot of these decisions were made possibly with the best information they had at the time. I always hate to hear the word lawsuit because it takes time, money, resources, and so forth. But all of that to be said, I don't know whether we'll get better walking directions if we ever have such a national, international event occur or not. Who knows whether that's really going to be in place at this time. I don't know.
It was interesting to me too that they decided to join this lawsuit, and I feel from what I read and what I heard at the board meetings, it was really because they wanted local control of what they thought was going on in Dallas County and specifically our schools. And so they wanted this local control. So they would say, we've elected these 7 board members to represent us. And so we want them to be the ones that are going to make these decisions, the local control. Yet they gave control over to Dr. Stone to like right at the beginning of all of this. And so then the local control of the people that were elected weren't making these decisions. It was left up to Dr. Stone. And so I think people that felt differently than what she was putting in place didn't feel like they had a voice, because now their elected official who could have been a voice for them was silenced and not given the ability to vote. And so, and then, you also think about the waste of the taxpayer money, whether you like what the governor decided to do or not, because he is the elected governor, we do have to, in my opinion, abide by what he says. And so even if you didn't agree with it, because it was in fact law, they were breaking the law by going against what he said. And so it's like they wanted to have it both ways. They wanted to listen to their local officials and have local control because they were elected, but then they didn't listen to them. They had to listen to Dr. Stone. So it was very tricky. And as a mom, it was very frustrating because I have the local control of my own daughter. And that was the worst thing for me, was then somebody was telling me, my governor was telling me that I got to choose as a parent and have that liberty as an American and as a Texan to choose. And I was thankful for that. But then my school board or actually no, my superintendent told me, no, you don't have the liberty to choose for your daughter who has special needs. She has to wear a mask, and making decisions
Right.
like that. And that was very personal for me, because I believe in liberty and I believe in parent choice, and no one knows my child better than me. And so that was where I got very frustrated with the decision making process through all of COVID.
Vanessa, did you want to add something to that?
Sure. I want to just add that when this happened, parents still had also a choice to keep their kids at home and choose them to be maskless at home. It is a district's responsibility to take care of their employees and the students that go there. Some students didn't have a choice. Some students don't have parents who stay at home. Some students have parents that work 3 or 4 jobs, and school is the only place they can go that is safe, where they're productive, and where they can eat. And in order to do that, we needed to make sure they also did not get sick. I think following medical expertise is important. And if they had to join a lawsuit for that to protect the district and to protect others, which is part of making the world a better place, is helping other people and keeping other people safe, because we don't know what kinds of critical illnesses other people have or who they go see, is important. I would also say that I don't understand why everyone's up in arms about spending money on a lawsuit like this, but no one was up in arms about spending money on a lawsuit that was fighting the fact that we created districts within Richardson ISD, and they did not want to have single member districts. That was a very expensive lawsuit that we as constituents had to pay.
Sure.
And nobody talks about that.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with all this. Thank you for bringing that up, and it's a good segue to reintroduce our guest today for those who are just tuning in, and we'll pick it up there in a moment. Jan Stell, District 5, and running for election. We also have Sherry Clemens in District 2, along with Vanessa Pacheco, also District 2, to reintroduce the topic. We're looking at superintendents and why they are leaving districts, and in fact, are they leaving districts because they're becoming too political? Segued into a conversation relating to the COVID situation and whether or not superintendent, in our case, Dr. Stone, was too dictatorial in the approach of what the science was, even when the science was changing. Good point to, if your concern about the medical condition of your students would be to keep them at home and isolate them. I think that was something that I thought about very early on in the pandemic personally. Again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not a doctor. I've never played one on TV. So I speak purely from my own ideas here. And that was that if we knew within a month or so of COVID, and we were 6 weeks, I think we stayed at our farmhouse, within 6 weeks of that, we knew that this was a disease affecting mostly the elderly. And I think perhaps a more prudent approach would have been for the elderly folks to have stayed home and had other people out and about in society and taking care of them. Same thing with students. We know the students' infection rate was exceedingly low, and the negative outcomes for students was also exceedingly low. And if taking local control for me meant that we were going to go local and come up with local solutions for local problems, then perhaps it should have been more local than just deferring across to Judge Jenkins, who was running the Dallas County response. Because, our schools run right up to the border here of Collin County, which had a whole different response. And we could get into that in more discussion, but in light of moving on with the topic, we're getting a question here from Annette, is it French? Sorry, I don't have my glasses on. One of the thoughts and segue into eating. There's that situation with the teachers in Joshua that were, I don't know if you guys are familiar. If not, the situation was they were forcing students to give them their free lunch so that they could get lunch for free as well. Any thoughts on that? Are they being made an example of in that regard?
What do you mean by that? Like, the school district gives free lunch to all our students right now?
Right, yeah, it was the teachers though. The teachers were taking the students. So a lot of times these free lunch programs in school are the student goes through the line, they get the free lunch because it's free. They have to take everything because that's the way the program works. And then they could just hand it off to the teacher. Well, the teacher could go, hey, you're not going to eat that. Can I take that? And now these teachers have been fired and disciplined, being prosecuted, I believe.
Well, I think if teacher wants to have lunch, they should be able to go through the lunch line and have the lunch too. I mean,
yeah, but
working for the district.
Taking the kids free lunch though is what their
Oh,
problem. Yeah.
I hadn't heard about that. That's very interesting.
Okay,
I
so
hadn't heard of that either. Yeah. Wow. That's interesting.
then maybe segue that into another question of recent topic that was introduced before we came on air today, was looking at teacher assaults. So there seems to be deeds being happened by teachers with grabbing the free lunches, but also on the flip side of that, a student now being charged with attempted murder of a teacher by strangulation. Is some of that perhaps the chaos that we see now percolating through to the school board meetings, to some of the superintendents realizing these things are getting a little too out of control maybe? Jan, what's your take on that?
You know, we're starting to hear about more fights, violence, and all of that. It's deeply concerning because we've been saying our schools are a safe haven. They're a place that you can go, you know, just like going to a fire station or whatever. It should be non-negotiable. But I know there's been lots of discussions about, okay, how do we discipline our children? How long does it take before discipline really occurs? I mean, I guess it's as personal as everybody in a family. Each family does it differently with their children, and some of the families we agree with, and some of them we don't.
Sure.
And I realize that a school board, a superintendent, a principal building, and all, they have certain guidelines that they want or need or feel like they have to. And I'm not totally versed on what those are. And I would assume they're different from elementary through junior high to high school. But the culture has changed so much that the respect for the teachers is not there. How do we, if we're not teaching respect in our own homes, expect that to translate into a school setting or any other large group setting? I guess that's our major concern, is that we no longer have those sorts of commonalities that we're used to, where you treat so-and-so with respect simply because of their position. It doesn't mean you agree with them, you know, you like the clothes they wear or whatever, but you still treat them because of the position they're in with the respect that is due. And we're not seeing that.
I think one of the, if it's okay if I jump in, one of the other things that could be going on in the classrooms is, you know, we've implemented this new curriculum, social emotional learning. We've given it a lot of our time. And is it really doing what we want it to do? Because I think anybody would tell you, because even Dr. Stone during a board meeting said she couldn't imagine anyone, I think she said befuddled, that anyone would ever disagree with SEL. And to me, SEL in its truest form is great. We want our kids to be socially and emotionally ready for school. And so I did that as a first grade teacher and a third grade teacher with my students, right? But now they have this curriculum in place that is supposed to guide teachers on having all these discussions. A lot of them are sometimes, I feel, not really in the school lane. I think a lot of parents are behind me on that. Just wondering why we're talking about these things that we feel like we should be talking about at home. Doesn't mean that I don't want real history to be taught and cultures to be celebrated. We have a diverse family. 2 of my children are Chinese, and thankful that they have Chinese celebrations at school to talk about their culture. But the SEL, it's not working. It doesn't seem to be working. It's not working for our academics because our scores are dropping. And by the way, we did test last year. It just didn't count. But we did test last year. And I think Dr. Stone saw the writing on the wall that this year is going to count. And so, you know, with this SEL is in place, the scores are dropping. We're having more violence in the classrooms, what seems to be. I mean, this week, yesterday, there was a huge fight at Lake Highlands High School. The video is very disturbing between some girls. And I could kind of see some teachers in the background. They couldn't even get involved because they were going to get hurt. And so we need rules. We need consequences. And there are certain schools, I feel like, in our district that have the leadership. For what I've heard and who I know and who I've talked to at these schools, these parents, they say at certain schools, this kind of stuff doesn't happen. And when it does, it is immediately stopped, and there are consequences for that. And I think that once, if we don't have rules and consequences, it is only going to get worse.
Right. Yeah, totally agree. But Vanessa, perhaps that's a good segue for us to batch you up with our next question on.
Well, can I make a
Oh,
comment?
sure. Yes. So I was going to take that into the next one of this.
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment that the strangulation event
Absolutely
did not happen in Richardson.
No.
Secondly, SEL program in Richardson, I believe, is 4 years old, if that. And maybe it was in process and not implemented, maybe 3 years. So if we consider that and then manage and do the math, that high school students right now did not receive SEL. So we can actually say factually that it doesn't work. We have the most recent students are the ones that are going through SEL right now. And I do say that managing and being able to talk about our feelings and speaking with respect is a two-way street, actually a three-way street. That includes parents, constituents, our society, and how we treat each other. We also should speak to our students with respect, and our teachers should be treated with respect. Like Jan said, it's leading by example. That's one way of doing it. And the other way is teaching kids how to recenter themselves, how to manage conflict, how to talk out problems.
Right.
I'm not saying it's going to eliminate every fight or remove all kinds of different consequences, but it definitely helps. And it also creates an open space for kids who are having issues and problems to come up and go to leadership in their schools, a teacher, an administrator, somebody, and deal with it that way instead of being physical.
Yeah, for sure. I agree 100%. And I think on the SEL side of things, when I was with the district, it's going back now 15 years when I first started with RISD, they did have a similar SEL program, except it was done by a company I'd worked with. They have a fantastic outreach called Rainbow Days. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with Rainbow Days. It's a charitable organization in Dallas, just north of downtown. And they do these homeless camps where they reach out to students and children who are in these shelters, some of the women's shelters, Genesis Shelter and those the like in Dallas. And they bring them to UT Dallas, my alumni, go Comets. And they discuss these things with students and give them life skills, teach them the soft skills we talk about a lot. And they have a discussion with the students in the classroom. They have a whole curriculum that goes with it, where they get two little cards. And one was a sunshine and one was a cloud. And the students used to be able to talk about, I had a sunshine day, I had a cloud day. And then be able to emote what they were feeling and experiencing. And through the guidance of the teacher, they would go through those emotions and deal with some of that stress as they were having. But I know, and I know that Lynn is watching us, so she'll probably enjoy this segue into the digital side of that now with the social emotional learning, where there's now these apps that the teacher marks multiple different, not just a cloud and a sun, but they go through with how's the student feel? Am I feeling down? Am I feeling energetic? Am I feeling unable to focus? Am I feeling like I can't? Am I feeling like I want to lash out? And these are being recorded on the app. And so the question becomes for a lot of parents, I think, and a concern is, what happens to that data once the teacher enters it? And again, I don't want to start a big conspiracy theory, but managing student data becomes a serious problem there, especially when it's brought through on a vehicle of social emotional learning and tagging them. Vanessa, do you have some thoughts on that?
We're all data. Everything we do is data. And yeah, what happens with the data? I think the best thing to do is make sure we have the right engineers and mathematicians and data people to really process it and find the best ways to read it and use it for us and give it to our districts and our educators and our psychologists and find better programs and implement improvements across everything that we do with children as far as how they grow, right? We can use it, it's scientific, right? It's a theory and we have to be able to prove certain things. That's what happens with the data. As far as the technology, everything we do is related, right? Everything we say is heard, recorded, managed in some way. We're not ever going to get away from that anymore. We exist in, zeros and ones forever.
Sure, yeah. As scary as that. Jan, that's your forte, right? Digital world that we live in, where even this the show right now is being recorded for all posterity. So in 20 or 30 years, when Lord forbid we look a little different, people could pull these things up and say, "Look what they said there," and those gotcha sound bites, right?
If I want to buy a bottle of wine, I don't want them to categorize me which color I do. So sometimes I'll buy it with cash. So they can't say, oh, she only likes white wine or red wine.
And now you said you like wine, and that could be a problem for some. Back when I started teaching, we were warned as educators that we shouldn't be in any pictures holding a bottle of beer, you know, otherwise you could get fired for that. So it's amazing how things work. For sure. So what I'm seeing is we probably need to follow Aretha Franklin on being RESPCT. Find out what it means to me. We don't have enough of that. Sorry, I know Sydney is gonna laughing loudly in the wings there. Horrible rendition, I know. So looking at respect like we have here right now, that all of us talking about controversial issues. No one's mudslinging, calling names, doubting anybody's veracity. We some of us come from this at different angles, and that's okay. I mean, I come from Africa. I come at it with my upbringing and what I saw in my social context. Sherry comes from her background and upbringing. Vanessa and Jan bringing their viewpoints. But we need more conversation, do not think, more discussion around these things rather than less. And I think that's difficult for some people because some people don't do well with confrontation. I have been told from time to time that I can be confrontational just because I like to discuss openly subjects that are controversial. And that's just part of that diaspora of America, is it not? Vanessa?
Sure. I mean, that's part of how we should teach our kids to talk to each other, to converse with each other and dialogue in every single class. None of us would be here, and I said that before, without teachers teaching us what our strengths are, without teachers giving us an outlook and saying, hey, you know what, you're a good debater. Why don't you do this part? Or why don't you do a little bit more AP history and government classes? Because that seems to be a strong suit for you and you'll be better able to communicate. You know, theater does the same thing. There's all kinds of strengths and things that happen at school that we enrich our kids with. And one of them is communicating with each other. And I'm running, and as a trustee, I want to be that bridge. I want to be the bridge of all of our communities and bring in the solutions that we need, be the listener, and just enrich every single student. Our core belief systems at home are at home. At school, we want to make sure they're enriched, they're taught, and they're fulfilled educationally and have no breaches and gaps. So that they can be successful at whatever their dreams and goals are. So yeah, I mean, we can all dialogue all day long, but we have to dialogue and find solutions together.
Absolutely. I think you're right. And me being the immigrant experience that I experienced, I think I look across the days sometimes at the board meetings and I'm wondering, when do we get the next immigrant board member, or when are we going to get the next and the next? And Sydney and I were talking earlier about if Dr. Hinojosa runs for mayor, he'll become the first Hispanic mayor. And we just had Judge Ketanji Jackson Brown be confirmed for the first African-American Supreme Court nominee. And these firsts that we keep having, you know, it's what, 2022 now. It's unfortunate, you know, first this, first that. And we got to, at some point, go, hey, we're all people first. And that was one of the things I think as an immigrant to this country, I always felt like I was on vacation here for a long time. It was like living in a Hollywood movie, because that was my only experience. The American culture was what I saw through Hollywood movies and growing up in a society, it was very censored. It was a very sort of narrow slither of Hollywood movies I was allowed to watch. And then when I saw 9/11, and I just remember people coming together so much so after that. It didn't matter what your background was. It didn't matter immigrant or not. They attacked where you lived, you know, and then you felt this feeling of solidarity with people that I think has since waned, and it morphed into now we have this tribalism going on, for want of a better word. And you see that, to jump on our next question, you see that with the school board chaos. Perhaps Jan, you might be able to talk to some of that. I think you've been down in the Lake Highlands area for a while, and a realtor, I believe, by trade. So you get to experience a lot of folks in different settings that are out there. And what would you say with regards to the tribalism we see, where the maskers sit on one side and the no masks sit on the other side, and dividing, and there was a big seating chart up there at the school board meeting. How did that translate into finding what's best for our students?
That was really interesting. I was at that school board meeting where they said, if you're masked, you can sit here. If you're unmasked, they did them in the back. So it was kind of interesting. I mean, there was quite a bit of talk among the people that you're for this and against that. You know, why couldn't it been split where, you know, someone wasn't always in the front and, you know, that the lines moved backwards. So that was a real interesting school board meeting to see. And then, of course, I don't know. It was normally when we go to school board meetings, there's not very many people. I'd taken pictures of them. And then we went that particular night and it was wall to wall, you know, out in the hall. So it just shows you what a divisive time that was. And of course, everybody had opinions, whether they had children with asthma, they had, you know, special needs or whatever. So that the consensus, they of course they couldn't come to a consensus. Not everyone could even speak, but that was an eye opener.
Did you go to that one, Vanessa? Did you see some of that turmoil? Your thoughts on that?
I was there, and it was weird, but it was no different than smoking, non-smoking sections in a restaurant or airplanes or, I mean, when I was a kid, I remember that and thinking how strange this is because, you know, suddenly people can smoke 3 tables from me, but I can still smell it. So I don't know how that really helped me.
Right.
I think it was a process like everything else. We aren't knowledgeable of everything. We can't do everything right all the time. We're human beings. We're flawed.
Right.
And sometimes we make decisions that may look okay, but at the end, was it really working? Was it helpful? I don't know. I mean, it's just what it is, right? To your point, yeah, it's 2022. Representation matters in every space. And our demographics nationally, we're here. We are represented as people of color, as women of color, as educated people in every area of our society. We are able to speak of and the needs. And as far as rules and policies, we have had rules, laws, and policies that are discriminatory, that are exclusive in the past, and those have changed. They have been updated and improved, and we have a lot more work to do. Yeah. And we need to do it together. We cannot make a better society without all of us unifying. We cannot make a better nation without unifying that part of ourselves. We can't leave behind 20-30% of ourselves somewhere else. We can't erase our history, and we have to acknowledge it.
Right. I think, Sherry, as a mom of a multi-ethnic family, what would you relate that with in your experience with what's happening at the school boards?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so interesting because, you know, we talk about wanting all these words are so good, right? Diversity and inclusion and bringing people together and wanting that. But yet we see how divided we are and on the outside. But then you go to a board meeting, and as the public, we're only seeing the very kind of probably end discussion on a lot of issues, and it ends up being a 7-0 vote. And while I want us to work together and be unified once the vote is put out, it as a mom watching, as a parent watching, it was frustrating to feel like that it wasn't a great discussion on all of our different viewpoints and bringing different ideas together to meet in the middle. And I know some of that goes on behind the scenes, but because of the Open Meetings Act, we are as parents and taxpayers supposed to be able to see that discussion so that we can understand where they got to that point, you know? So, you know, and then just on a personal note, like you talked about with my family, I am 100 and billion% in favor of celebrating strengths and celebrating cultures and helping people be empathetic. I know this week there was a Ramadan thing that was going to happen at MST, one of our magnet schools. And one of the books they were going to read was this great book about a hijab and what it is and why students wouldn't want to make fun of someone that wears that. And it was really a really great book. And that's the type of thing that I think we definitely need in our schools so that people understand our beautiful nation is made up of amazing cultures and so many great stories and traditions and things. So those are the beautiful parts about it. But it isn't just that. It then becomes politically charged because it's not just celebratory and things like Chinese New Year, or things that would bring people together and learn. It becomes it can become pitting people against each other, calling people one this way or that way, and talking about race in a negative way or differences in a negative way, or inclusion actually meaning we have to include these people, so we're going to have to censor these people. And
Right.
and when you do things like that, it is political. And then when it's political, it's divisive. And that's what I feel like I saw in the school board rooms was a very politically charged, really divisive school district that I wasn't feeling like they were actually listening to both sides and having that discussion that politics brings. It was very frustrating as a mom that had a hard topic to bring to the board last fall in regards to some books, a book that my daughter brought home. I didn't feel that the response that I got was not a caring response. It was they don't want to address anything that's controversial because it's hard and you're not going to please all people. And so, you want to come and then I think, Vanessa, you talked about like they want to give solutions. It's been 5 months since that board meeting and there still have been no solutions toward the book situation. And so we're coming with these, and it wasn't just books, and that's a whole nother topic, I know, but other things people were coming with and feeling like we're still not having those issues resolved. That's frustrating as a parent and a taxpayer. And so those are just some of the thoughts that are swirling in my head.
Yeah, so that's great. And Vanessa, I'd like to go back to you in a second, but let me just welcome those new folks who have logged in, and we're having a discussion with 3 of the candidates for Richardson ISD School Board. We have Vanessa Pacheco and Sherry Clemens in District 2, and we have Jan Stell for District 5, discussing the state of education today. And we've hit on a couple of interesting topics that you've all heard discussed out there, looking at social emotional learning, looking at, we'll get into the CRT word here momentarily, and just looking at what's happening in our school boards, looking at what's our superintendents are leaving en masse, our teachers as well leaving en masse. We got a question coming here from John Urso Hill. He says he's interested in taking a look at the question of teaching comprehensive history, bringing us closer together, or does it drive us further apart? Do you as candidates believe in restricting what is taught in the classroom by limiting access of students to a more complete version of history? I'd just like to hear your thoughts on that. Maybe Jan, I think we haven't heard from you, but what do you think of that, the inclusive history?
I'm actually a history major. Of course, that's been a while, but I actually talked to someone that they have gone down to Kerrville for Texas history specifically. Apparently there's a museum down there that has incredible amounts of Texas history, and they're trying to get curriculum put together for our, I believe it's 4th and 7th graders that do Texas history, that is accurate to the things that are in the museum. And I applaud that because I think we need to go back and look at things. Do we want to exclude things? No. I mean, this is a free society, free press, and so forth. But I would like to see it done more in an educational way where it's not so politically charged, because we know that can be done if you can, but accurate, and go back, like I said, to a Texas museum. And so they're working very hard to make that happen. And that really excited me. Of course, everybody might come at it with a little bit different lens, but maybe we can get true facts and then it can go from there. So I'm very hopeful. It will take time to do that, but let's get our Texas history straight. And then of course we have other things that go on from that. But that was encouraging to me.
Yeah, but Vanessa, I know that you and I talked and we met, and it was a great conversation, by the way. Enjoy your perspective of your folks being immigrants, and perhaps some of your take on how history is today and some of the controversy we see with that. A friend of mine was reading a book about the Alamo, and it's sort of a recasting of how did that really happen and how do the folks south of the border view that. Some of that history, to me, I was not taught that in school because I didn't go to school here, but in college I certainly took a couple of government classes, so I know just enough to be dangerous. But give us some of your take on that. How do you feel as a person of color in a district where this discussion is happening around history and how we recast it or just look at different sides of the same fact?
It's all fact. We need to be inclusive of it all. I don't think we need to restrict any type of knowledge. I don't believe that speaking truth to genocide, speaking truth to having segregation of Mexican Americans, or basically taking Mexicans or people of Mexican origin who were American citizens and then deported back to Mexico back in the day is a political issue. It's an actual fact. It's a fact that people don't talk about. It's, the Trail of Tears is a thing, right? My Native brothers and sisters went through it. Some of them survived, and here I am, right? I have Native American blood in me. I am also Mexican, and it's something, it's historical, and I've always known this history, and it is disappointing. It's disappointing to see our books have a chapter or have 3 paragraphs and then eliminate parts of it. I keep telling, and I will always say this: we exist. We're not erasable. We're not going to go away.
Right.
And our voice should be heard. Our history should be heard, and it should be taught accurately with facts. As bad as it makes some people feel, I guess, I mean, I don't know why it would make anyone feel bad. It's just something that happened. It's bad decisions that were made by governments, bad decisions that were made by leaders for whatever reason. Those things happened. Slavery happened. Texas was basically taken from Mexico, the Alamo. I studied history in Mexico with my cousins. I was across the border. I'm truly binational. And the way it's seen, it's not the way it's taught, right? And it's all economic, and it was all because of slavery. And we need to come to the truth, right? We need to say it. That's really why it happened. And Mexico was anti-slavery, and that's why the fight happened. Why is this wrong? Why is it wrong for people to learn this, to understand? And I think if we're going to exclude it, then we're excluding the African-American experience. We're excluding the Mexican-American experience. We're excluding the Native American experience. And that is not the whole of America.
Right. Yeah, you make some good points there, Vanessa. I agree. If we tend to focus on one side of history, perhaps we miss the perspectives, the lenses. I think one of you talked earlier about the lens of what we see history as. But Sherry, perhaps you can address some of those rather than me just bloviating my thoughts on these things. Oh, we can't hear you.
Sorry, I muted myself because my dog was barking. We learn so much from our past failures, and we're able to learn about those because of the beauty of public education, and so, yes, we need to look at our problems, and there are a lot of where we went wrong. And I think teaching truth is very important for our students. And there have been times where we have failed in that. And I'm thankful that the State Board of Education of Texas continually looking at the TEKS, if the history TEKS, to make sure that it is an accurate representation of what we should be teaching in the classroom. And I'm thankful that our teachers then have that guide to know exactly, because I think as a teacher, it would be hard for me to know exactly what to teach in certain situations, because you do want to make sure you're teaching the truth and you're addressing these issues in the right way. And so thankfully we do have the TEKS that helps us, in the classroom guide everything. But education public ed is supposed to be a safe place, and it's not supposed to be controlled by one political party or another. And so I keep talking about this, but you say we have a choice to homeschool, but I have just as a right as anybody else to send my kids to public school expecting that they get a politically neutral education. And so I shouldn't have to feel, and I know so many of my friends and families and people that I've heard from other schools that aren't just my schools that are maybe more diverse or different in certain makeup or whatever, they're leaving the public school because they don't feel like it's neutral anymore, and they are having to make the choice. And so I hear a lot of times, you know, well, if you disagree, you can just homeschool, or if you disagree, you can go to private school. But my right as a taxpayer and as a citizen of America, like my kids have just as much of right to be in public education, and I shouldn't feel bad about wanting it to be neutral for my kids. And so, you know, I think that's just an easy thing that people say that is hurtful to somebody like me who pays a lot of taxes to be in a really great school district. And I love public education. I was a public ed student, 1st through 12th grade. I mean, my parents were like, we are a public ed family. My sister's been in education for 30 years. It's very important to me. And I want to stay and fight for neutrality because I want all people to stay in public education. I believe that we can come together and have those hard discussions and bring it back to a place where everybody does feel welcome and does feel included, and we're not getting these political charged things going on, that it can be politically neutral. So that's my hope and my goal, and why I'm running is because I feel like I want to be a voice, and that's why I'm running. I mean, that's why I decided to step up and do the next thing, is because I knew that we needed to change things and to make sure that we're going back to neutrality.
That's a good point, and perhaps I can interject my little bit of thought on that with regards to Vanessa. You brought up a great point, is why are people hurt by that? And the thing that made me think of that was back in 9/11 when that happened. I just remember there was a strong push by most Americans, I think, to be sure to say, we hate what happened on 9/11, we hate the terrorists, they hijacked a religion. And so don't hold all Muslims accountable, or the faith of Islam itself accountable, for what some crazy, and I won't use the language on this live broadcast, but some crazy mofos did out there, flying planes into buildings, etc. Does that not also segue into perhaps what some white people would feel in regards to their history being painted as these guys who were some bad mofos that had slavery and treated people of color very harshly, and that some of that might then bridge into today, and you might see some pushback in class, etc. What do you think, Vanessa?
I don't think that's accurate. I mean, we had entire societies and cities and groups of families and businesses all over the nation that did not have slaves. So, and they were white.
Sure.
We had different groups of people, right, of religious entities that did not have slaves, that lived in this country during the slavery, times, and they didn't have them. So
Right.
I'm not sure why that would be a thing. Not everyone. It's like studying Spain or Italy, right, and seeing their dictatorships and stuff like that. Why would a Spanish person feel bad about that? Or why would Italians feel bad? It's a part of their history. It's
Right.
part of what happened, right? They murdered their own people, who spoke up.
Oh,
It's
humans are
not,
horrible to
it's
each other,
not a
for
thing
sure.
not to talk about, right?
For sure. No, I agree.
It actually
wholeheartedly.
should include and improve our pride as Americans, to know that we have moved ahead, to know that we have evolved and improved and created policies and laws that were helpful. Yeah, it took a long time. Then we had the civil rights movement, and it happened, right? But we also had the women's rights movement. All 3 women here, including Sydney, we would not be talking here if those things hadn't happened, right? So what are we going to do? Vilify the women who were against it? No, I mean, we all have a space now because of other women. Even the women who were against it had a space, and they were able to actually speak up for that very reason, for the fight of speaking up, for the fight of having the rights.
Right.
So why is that a bad thing? No
That's a
one's
good question.
vilifying anyone. We are just making sure that history is correct. History is not a political thing. We want to make sure that everyone is seen. Why don't we talk about more of the Asian Americans that were interned, right? We had concentration camps here. We still do in some places, right? With the Mexican immigrants and the South American immigrants. Those are camps, and it's sad. It's sad that we haven't moved in certain spaces, but we'll never do that if we're not an educated society about what's happened in the past and how not to do it now. And how do we improve?
Right. So how do you teach that in the classroom to root that? Because I totally agree. We do have a class of folks in America where there are the impoverished people who are overrepresented by people of color. You know, south of the border,
We
have
teach it by making sure our books are representative, right? We teach
Right.
it by making sure we have writings included of people of color too, right? A lot of our books are selected by a very small amount of people who don't happen to represent the entirety of society, not even the entirety of our Texas society.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And so we build it in. We have to move towards that. I mean, that's a state thing, that's a curriculum thing. But it's fine. And I think we need to encourage our community, be more supportive, attend, participate.
So I think that's a good segue back to my history person, Jan over there. What's your thinking on that? How much have you seen history change over the years to be more inclusive of folks south of the border, folks who have now multi-generation growing up in America, who look different to other folks on both sides of that equation? How do we change that view of history? How do we recast what happened in light of current circumstances today and this more egalitarian society?
Well, like Vanessa said, there's just a few people that make the decisions on the books. Sherry and I met with Evelyn Brooks, who's a lady of color. She's also an educator. We met with her earlier in the week. She's actually running for District 14 for the state of Texas. So that's a huge district. And so a lot of those folks then get involved in looking at the books and so forth. Evelyn was a beautiful lady that you could see wanted the best, not to be judged in terms of your color, but that all people are represented, like you say, in the books that we get, as well as let's talk about your intellect. Let's talk about what you learn and so forth. So I really enjoyed her fresh ideas when we did the meeting with her to look towards Texas as being, as we say, very, very well represented from all cultures, not just one. So that was exciting to me that she said, once we know what's needed in Texas as educators, now we can never go back. We need to press forward. And so I think we'll see some changes in our curriculum.
Right. I think that's part of that for sure. And I think what we run into, again, speaking of my personal experience growing up in South Africa, we had the Zulu tribe was the local tribe where I was, and talking about most Americans know Shaka Zulu, right? King Shaka as the preeminent warrior that he was, who formed the Zulu nation to what it was. But unfortunately, the Zulus didn't have the written words. So most of their history is relied on by an English chap who went down there in the 18 teens and observed what he saw and wrote it down with his lens of perspective. And I just think that we need more of these conversations, more how we discuss these things. Let's look at Santa Ana. Let's look at Davy Crockett and the Alamo and discuss that from both perspectives. I think that's a valid conversation. I just think interesting, Joyce Foreman joining us, the esteemed trustee for Dallas ISD, asked the question, have we really moved away from slavery? The effects are still amongst the Black people, no different than the Holocaust. And that's a good question to open up and perhaps to think about wrapping on with the messaging here is what has happened in the systemic inequalities that we had and downright the evilness of slavery. I mean, Wilberforce in the UK, we learned about in school back in the 1810s, fighting to end slavery in the English Empire, and then America in the 1860s with the Civil War, and then the women's suffrage, Vanessa, moving on in 1919, I believe, was when all women got the right to vote. I mean, if you can imagine that's barely a century ago. And then in the 1960s, when Black people got their civil rights at least validated to that point. How do we deal with that in the educational context of today? How do we address the inequities that came from a system that was stacked against people of color and people of various genders and ethnicities? And how do we make that right? What is the solution to that? So this is perhaps a good way to wrap up a great conversation. I just want to say thank all of our guests, Jan Stell in District 5, Sherry Clemens in District 2, and Vanessa Pacheco in District 2 as well. Thank you so much for this. So if we could just end on this idea of how do we fix those inequities that has been wrought on a population of people prior to this point in history. And let's go with Vanessa. I think you started last, so we'll start first with you, Vanessa.
That's fine. We do it like we eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. We have to make sure we move from the top down, right? Let's make sure our policies and all these systemic things that have generally been barriers to people of color to be removed, right? But it is hard work. We need brave conversations. We need people to show up, lean in and be really honest and help us do the work together. How do we do this in schools? By making sure we reach all our students and informing and giving them the tools they need and the supports that they need at the moment that they're in right now, so that children can learn, right? They can all learn and they learn quickly if they have the right supports, and then they'll move ahead, right? Like, Cesar Chavez said, knowledge can never be taken away once we learn. That's why education is so important for us, right? Pride of all of us to be Americans is something that we have. And as people of color, we have our pride. We need to be taught this pride. We need to make sure that all kids have pride for themselves as human beings, because that way no one, mistreats us. We don't feel like anyone is able to make us feel lesser than we are. And finally, let's make the world a better place together. We have to come in, teach our kids, meet them where they are and help them improve, right? We know that education, even if they go to military or they do a trade, it is so much more than having them fail out of school or drop out of school. It is so important to make sure that they read, they do math, they can write, so that they can communicate and so that they can advocate for themselves, for their communities, and so that they're involved in our society.
Yeah, thank you so much, Vanessa. I agree. Folks need to feel welcomed into where we are and included. Jan, would you like to pick it up with there on how we can teach this history and how we can diminish the inequities that we have found from what has happened in the past?
I think it goes down to the person that's the boots on the ground is the teacher in the classroom. As we've talked about, we've got 18% of our RISD teachers that are leaving. I think, again, a classroom cannot run has nothing to do with race if we don't have a good educator in that room, because he or she would join RISD because of the diversity. If they were not into diversity, they would go to a completely different school district.
For sure.
So with that being said, let's work towards quality teachers. It always breaks my heart when I see, and I'm sure you've seen the signs too, can you teach? When can you start? That's not how we want to address our most precious commodity, which is our teacher in the classroom. Can you start? I mean, that isn't professional. And I don't want RISD to get to that point, because then when that teacher is in that classroom and it is supported by support staff, doesn't have too many children, they're then able to go to the children of color, and hopefully that we're not just being looking at them, oh, well, these children are whatever color and they can't be taught. No, we don't talk that way. We don't teach that way. But I think the teachers that come to us have their hearts in the right place. They just need to be supported so that they can help the children that are coming from lots of different backgrounds, whether it be culturally, whether it be religious, or whether it be racial. And we know that our kids that are that are financially challenged, that they have their own challenges, and that has nothing to do with race. So we've got lots of challenges in RISD, and I think it starts with the classroom teacher, and we need to talk about pay, we need to talk about support and professionalism, and get the respect back for the teacher in the classroom, and then a lot of these issues will then be resolved.
Yeah, right on. No argument from me on the respect for the teachers in the classroom, for sure. It's a hard job out there. And I think I think Dr. Stone said, unless you're in the classroom, you can't imagine what it's been like. And I think some people have a rough idea, but it is sure is tough. And so we'll wrap it up with you, Sherry, before I have to make some show notes in regards, again, just to remind everyone, we're talking here with Jan Stell for District 5, Vanessa Pacheco for District 2, and Sherry Clemens, also District 2, discussing the state of education, and we're wrapping up with understanding how to overcome the systemic issues from the past of racism, slavery, inequities of people of color, not just African American or Black students, but also people from various different ethnic backgrounds, Hispanic and the like. Let's not forget our Asian friends as well, the Vietnamese, and we have a very large Vietnamese population in our ISD. So shout out to you folks. Sorry, I didn't mean to leave you out of my entire list of folks there. But Sherry, how would you wrap that up for us on addressing those inequities of the past?
Yeah, I mean, humanity is flawed. We know that. We have a lot of mistakes, and we have to dive into those and make sure that we're addressing those in every area, you know. But to bring it to maybe a solution focus on, okay, what we know, we have these problems. We know we've got to dismantle that. We know we've got to figure out how to get I loved what Vanessa said about, you know, reading and math and all these things, and then good teachers. Okay, but how do we do that as a public school district? And at the Berkner meeting last week, the last question was from a Black dad who said, you know, how are you going to raise the scores of the Black and Hispanic students, because the gap is getting wider? And my answers online. You can find that all of our answers are online. And of course, when you have more time to think about it, you start thinking through solutions, right? It's like, okay, well, how are we going to help all kids? And so I laid awake at night that night, like thinking through, and, you know, it has to be that we have to make sure the bar is here for all students, and that we are giving them the most rigorous curriculum that we can to raise them to these high standards and give them really high expectations. I mean, I think about my teachers in my classrooms that did the best for me education wise. They had a high bar for me, and then they got to know me. So it was both, right? They got to know me and made me believe in myself, and then they set the bar really high for me. And I think that the dad's concern was, you know, are we going to put the bar here so that my kids can get to here? And that is the wrong way to look at it. And so the bar has to be really high, and then we have to say, okay, how do we have them read, do math, these things that we know that's going to, like Vanessa said, that's what's going to set them up for their best success. And so we have to do these things. So what are the correct solutions that are going to get us there? And that's something that I will be a voice for all families, going in and asking those hard questions, and working together with fellow trustees and parents and taxpayers and business owners in the area to continue to evolve this conversation on what are the best solutions for a public school district to get the best educational outcomes. And we've done it before. Richardson ISD has been an academic excellent school district before. I believe we can get there again. It's going to take a lot of work and a lot of solution-minded people to get the job done. But I really do believe that we can succeed again.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that all three of you ladies have been phenomenal to join in the race, to put your hat in the ring. It's not an easy thing. It costs a lot of time and a lot of money. I wish we had more folks like you in our district jumping into the fray to have those voices at the table. Vanessa, bringing your background into it is wonderful. Thank you so much for running. Sherry, likewise, all you do in education and being a product of being a teacher in that setting. Amazing to see. And thank you, Jan, as well. All the background that you have in education, also being a teacher, I think is great. I'm a little biased there, so my apologies to those folks who might not I think that's totally fair, but being a teacher, my passion is education, has been for a long time. I think for the district, good times look ahead for more people like you folks getting involved. And I hope that you won't, should you not win for any of our candidates, I hope that you stay involved, stay engaged, come to all those meetings, find out where the decisions are being made, because they impact your students, they impact your children, and they impact, for me, our society. So thank you again, Jan Stell, Sherry Clemens, Vanessa Pacheco. Thank you so much for joining us. Programming note, there's no show next week because of Easter, so stay tuned for the show after that. And with that, I will bid you adieu. Thank you for watching Coffee and Politics with Sydney Walker, even though I'm not Sydney Walker.